Good morning. It would be totally inappropriate for me to begin this without acknowledging that it is such a fantastic organization of this event. So my compliments to the organizers for holding such a world-class event here. So if you will join me first in giving a show of hands, applause for them. So the technical session today here we are talking about is rethinking on vertical development. And rethinking, I guess, can happen in two ways. One aspect of rethinking is that there's been raging debate over the decades I have seen in our country of whether it is appropriate to go vertical and the cons attached to it, what are the disadvantages, and we are all aware in our schools of architecture, in the academia, and in the practice as well, how people talk about the pitfalls of going vertical. But for me, I think that's not a debate anymore, because the way things are going, the way our statistics show, which I'm going to share a couple of them with you, I don't think that's a debate anymore that whether we should be going vertical or not. I definitely think it's a given that we need to go vertical. I think what is a debate really then is that how do we go vertical, making sure that we address issues of sustainability, issues of quality of living, and issues of, as the theme today talks about this conference, happiness. So I guess that's the debate, or that's the issue we really need to look at more closely. And like I said, to strengthen my point, in another 30 years, 3 decades, we are going to have 75% of the world's population. Mind you, the population is only growing also side by side. 75% of the population is really living in cities. And cities, at the end of the day, are a finite space. Land itself is a finite space. And population continues to grow. So I think the answer there is inevitable as far as vertical development and its need is concerned. There has, of course, always been this dream that we hear of people really owning a piece of land, owning a house with their own little garden, and that's been a dream that everybody tries to aspire to. But maybe even those dreams, I'm not saying need to be dismissed, but they need a rethink, that how do we meet those aspirations of society in new designs and current forms of urban development. So going vertical, like I've said, is really now a necessity. So what I'm going to do is, very quickly, I thought I had 30 minutes, so I'll fast track because I have 18 or perhaps 16 left now. I'm going to share a few design approaches of our practice as far as vertical development goes. And this is really more to solicit responses, reactions, because this is a community of architects sitting here on just trying to get ourselves engaged in what is that right form of vertical development going forward. So this is a project, an office building done in the 90s in Delhi. And if you look at Connaught Place, really, primarily, it has been orthogonal boxes like this in the name of vertical development, which have come up there post-independence. This particular plot or lot of land which was allotted was actually it was strategically located because it's on the cross sections of 2 important roads in the city. And therefore, the idea came that how do we, and this is a practice probably one has seen in many cities around the world, of within from your own plot, creating a sense of an urban space and giving that urban space back to the city. But that's something not very much that we have seen in our country. So this was, in that sense, a design intervention where the idea was that how do you create an urban plaza or an urban public space? And then also the idea of breaking that orthogonal block and modulating the built form in such a way that it ends up creating more interest, it's more environment conscious, it's more architecturally tectonic, and it has this kind of terraces. In terms of space, it basically comprises of 2 floors of retail, and then it was office floors above. And that was actually what came out of it. So you see the urban plaza, which is I can't use the pointer on this, but you can see the plaza at the bottom right of the screen and how that volume is shifted. And then this is also tied up with statutory norms. So wherever the Delhi Fire Service requires refuge areas, you start ending up creating these terraces. But more importantly, it's about how do you engage the public in a vertical experience. So it was one of the first few times, or first time perhaps, that you had glass elevators in those 3 vertical strips that you see, which are glass elevators which take a person all the way to that level, and then you experience your city in a very different way. There are many people in a city who actually are born, live, and die actually literally on the first, second, third floor of a building. They never experienced their city from upper levels. So this gave that opportunity for the public to be involved in at least appreciating what their city looks like from the top. And this is that urban gesture of an atrium as you enter the building. And then it was also about art, that why can we not engage art with architecture? So this was one of those first attempts where you see art and mural being incorporated into a building where a canvas is going 23 floors high, and that's how this art gets incorporated in it. Now coming straight to vertical development today. How do we address these issues? Issues have changed, challenges have changed. So how do we look at these aspects today? So I'm going to show you a couple of projects which actually are from India, but also then from Asia. Since this is an ARCASIA conference, I thought it's appropriate to share with you some of the work our practice is doing, our firm is doing in Asia. So this is a project in Kuala Lumpur. Now, Kuala Lumpur, the image on the top is what the city looked like a few decades back, and the bottom image is what you see, which is a more recognizable impression we have of Kuala Lumpur today. So you can see that imprint of vertical development that has come up there. So Malaysia has embarked on this very ambitious project where they are creating a high-speed train link all the way from Singapore, going through Malaysia and reaching all the way to Bangkok. So this is a very high vertical development, of course, which is going to happen at certain strategic places, including Kuala Lumpur. In Kuala Lumpur, there is a 500-acre land parcel, which was actually an old airfield right in the heart of the city. Something like in Delhi, we have the Safdarjung Airport, I would say. So they have 500 acres here, and they want to redevelop it, and they want to densify this, and they want to make a vertical city. So finally, 5 architects have been shortlisted because this is a really massive project. It's about 20 crore square feet of construction. So 5 global architects, including Zaha Hadid, Atkins, Overroop, and our firm from India has been amongst the last 5 who are there, who will be now distributed parcels within this entire development to develop. So the idea here is that how do you create, while densities are a challenge, while the necessity to go vertical is inevitable, how do you ensure that the quality of living is something that is not being at all compromised? So there is this whole gesture of creating this entire public space, which you see with the water body right in the heart of the complex, and surrounded by promenades and various other public facilities, including museums and retail and entertainment, etc. And then because this is a transit-oriented development, it's a multimodal transport node. So what happens is that when you get down from this high-speed train, which is the station is actually at a plus 30-meter level, which means literally it's like 10 floors above. How do you engage that with the ground, and then not just the ground, but the subterranean levels where the mass transit or the metro of the city is running, which is at a level of minus 20 meters. So it's really creating that engagement of a public space, which is now not limited to 1 or 2 levels, but it's spanning 50 meters in height, from the plus 30 meter down to minus 20 meter. And then, of course, the rest of the built form, which comprises of towers and multi-uses. So it's about bringing together, it becomes one of those places which we talk about. You work there, you live there, and you play there. So these are various images of how that development comes up, that being the station on the right that you see, the high-speed train station. and then various other aspects which contribute to a balanced quality of living. Moving closer home, there have been, I think, since India gained independence for 7 odd decades almost, 6 plus decades, we've had this debate whether FAR or FSI in cities should be from 1, should it go up to 1.5, or should it be 1.33? And we've remained within that sort of a canvas. Today, I think that canvas is set to really change, because Delhi is one of the cities, one of the first few cities, I guess, which has implemented the TOD policy, the Transit-Oriented Development Policy, where the FSI is almost touching 5. And therefore, it necessitates, again, there is no other way but to go vertical. So there was an international competition for the first TOD project, which is this East Delhi hub floated by DDA. And this is a project which is on about 80 acres of land. We won this competition, which is now through the process of statutory approvals. But what is important to see is that while you see the grain of fabric around the site, which has been 2, 3, 4 stories, you are going to see this new morphology, new urban morphology, which starts taking shape. And of course, this being the first, I hope is going to elicit a lot of reactions, a lot of responses, a lot of thinking, maybe rethinking, but certainly not going back. So therefore, we need to really apply our minds now across our architectural and design fraternity of how to take forward this idea of vertical development. This is what you see here, that this development on 80 acres of land is more than 1.5 crore square feet. And it is complete, so it is one of those first smart districts or smart cities in a sense, which is coming up in India, a greenfield in that sense, where you have various aspects of living being brought together. So it's about where you work, you live, you play, you have all kinds of facilities within that land, different from what Delhi has emerged over the years, where you have a Nehru Place or a Bhikaji Kama Place, which is an office or district center, and people commute 2 hours just to reach their office and travel back. This is a new mode of living that's coming up. So I'll just quickly show you a walkthrough or fly-through of what this looks like. So that was, of course, something that's coming up in Delhi, and it's going to be the first TOD, transit-oriented development project in the country. I'm sure going to frame a lot of guidelines for rest of the cities to follow. This is a project in Colombo, but I think we have paucity of time as I see the timer here clicking away. So I won't take time on this particular project. Suffice to say that this is a big development in the heart of Colombo, which is, again, you can see the kind of grain of development is very much like you saw in the East Delhi Hub project, low rise, except for a couple of towers, the World Trade Center towers, which you see on the bottom right, which are existing in the city. But the city is transforming itself through a major redevelopment program. And within that, there is this project which is about developing 7 million square feet development just on 7 acres of land. So it's a very, very large development which is now being done by us, which needs to be basically, again, go high-rise. I'll come to the last project I want to talk about is that while you looked at some of the initiatives of the government, but on the other side of the spectrum where you have private developers, and of course, some of us architects, I think you'll concur with me that the developers today seem to have disappeared from the horizon to a large extent. But nevertheless, there have been developers who are playing a major role in the development of large-scale projects, where again, they are building on the same kind of FSIs, the same kind of FARs, and how do we treat that kind of residential development? Now, when I look across all over India, when you go to cities, you see a kind of product coming in terms of the buildings that you see, residential developments. They actually are not that different, whether you could be in Mumbai, Pune, Hyderabad, Delhi, Gurgaon. They all sort of kind of look very similar. And I think architects are in the conundrum where you are driven, we are all driven by these meeting the efficient FARs and FSIs. But at the same time, I think the initiative required is somewhere to convince these private developers, like a project here which is in Gurgaon, being built right now by L&T, where the attempt we made was that these are 35-storied buildings. So while people buy apartments, they end up living in that little cocoon of theirs. If they buy a flat on the 2nd floor or the 5th floor or whatever it might be, they are never really experiencing the city. They are cocooned in their apartment. There's very little interaction. There's very little enjoyment of nature. They are removed from the ground level. So in this project, we've tried to attempt to change that style of living. So with each apartment, we came up with this idea that if it's a 3,000 square feet apartment, each apartment also sells a 500 square feet space on one of these upper levels. And these upper levels can then be used by somebody for becoming their meditation space, their home office, their library, or their gym, or their entertainment space. But what it does is, it does end up bringing people closer to nature in some way, rather than being cocooned in their apartment, stepping out onto the balcony, and that's their only relationship with nature and the world outside. So therefore, we looked at how do we reinvent this humble apartment within that complex, which starts bringing some kind of multiplicity in terms of uses, but also multiplicity in terms of the experiences of the resident in that condominium complex. So that's the kind of thing we have tried to do here by bringing in, if you see, not only at the upper levels and the bottom level, but also at certain times in the middle somewhere, introducing spaces. So spaces like a gym or a health center or facilities like that have been brought into the middle of the stomach of the tower. That's what it looks like. So like I said, these are attempts at trying to look at different dimensions of vertical development with an angle of realism, because we need to make sure that whatever we try to do, we are in sync with society and the demands and needs of people around us. I'm going to close here by just mentioning more images of this. So I'm going to close here by just mentioning that there has always been a desire to go vertical. over the last century and a half, across the globe, people have always aspired to build taller and taller. But I think the trend has always been that whenever a tall building has been announced, the idea has been that it is like somebody who's growing taller with his head higher than the shoulders of the people around, or in this case, the buildings around. And therefore, the attempt of the architecture also many times has been to scream for attention, to call for attention. But I think when we start now reinventing vertical development, all of us perhaps should give some thought to the fact that we don't need to scream for attention and just try to create an iconic building, which has sometimes resulted in these kind of surrealistic images being created. Rather, we need to create a vertical development, a model of vertical development, which is really going to be sustainable, which is going to be very inclusive and not stand out necessarily, but really has to be very, very contextually responsive. So with that, I close. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. The last World Happiness Report of this year ranked Italy, so beautiful and so pleasant country, as the 50th place. How is it possible? It's possible because this study doesn't take care about urban setting, about architecture, about climate, about landscape, but about gross domestic how do you say that? Gross domestic per person, understand? About social care and about also the sentiment you have about corruptions in your country. So some people disapprove that kind of method to calculate happiness in the city, and some pragmatic and I would say positive people, as for example the mayor of Bogota, try to give happiness by the urban development and the possibility for people to have citizen places to meet and to develop also transportations. Some architects also focus on architecture to give you happiness. As for example, you have here the Cité radieuse of Le Corbusier, you have the Unité of Marseille. And here the goal is to think domestic happiness within a community. So you have social places, you have common places, you have a shared terrace, for example, you have inside streets, you have commercial facilities. And people were happy to live there, and they are still happy. Instead, there is not now the same population. It was middle-class people at the beginning. Now it's much more upper classes. And that make this beautiful building, a little bit like a gated community. Not so much because of people of upper class, I think, but also because the building is not on the ground, but up. So it's a little disrupt with the city path. Sorry for my English. In France, after war, we need a lot of housing construction. There was a very large scale of housing because of the baby boom, because also of people coming back from North Africa, and that made a lot of people we had to house very quickly. Sarcelles is, I think, the first and the biggest of that large development cities. It has another distinction. It is that this city has given his name to an illness. It is the illness of the sadness of the large development housing. This city is near Paris, about 15, 20 kilometers, and it was thought as mostly housing settlements without very few common places and not work in this place. And it was not linked with the mobility networks. So at the beginning, people was happy. It was medium class people. Some could buy their apartments. And the architecture was not so bad. It was stone facade. You had green spaces for children to play. But with the crisis, and you had also, which is very important, you had the modern comfort, which at this time was a luxury thing. So people was happy. But when came the crisis, economic crisis, they little by little get out and leave the city, and then this city became a ghetto. Another ghetto, another climates, but always for the same causes. Here we are in Medellin, and they made a huge effort to imagine systems to connect recently the large parts of the city, the loin, how to say loin? So, it's an interesting system of metro cab because it permits you to go to the mountain very easily. And it permits also people to see the city in another way. You not only go from one way to the other one, but you also discover your city. You see where you are living, you see where you are going, and that's a very new thing. Also very new, also it's interesting to see that you are seen from the ground, so you can use that cab to diffuse messages of a peaceful, of a citizen, of a peaceful and well, you understand, amor and humanismo. Another interesting experience is that travel mechanic scales. When they stop, you stop from one to take the other one. There are little places, micro-public places where people can meet together, where they can have a drink, they can talk, and they can also, you can see there is a lot of street art. All that make the city change. Very beautiful image. And also people is practicing the common facilities. They are teaching how to practice that new way of being a citizen. Back to Paris. Actually, we tried, politics try to get the ghettos I spoke before, to get linked better to the city. So they imagine a huge plan at the metropolitan scale. So, and this plan is resumed in a large new metro who is going to link everything. Metros plan new project is that they heard experiences I talked about before, and they imagine this metro not only as a way to link this point with this one, but also a way to learn how to be a new citizen, how to link together better. We did a competition in one of the stations of that big metro. That it was we compete, but we didn't win. But our project consists in try to enlarge the footprint of the Seoul station with a large canopy that is going to link with the tram station which is near. So we offer a public protected place for people to stay. That are views from inside. Well, when we do architecture at another scale, we are always involved in our wish to make connections between public and private, between interior, exteriors. In another word, how to allow each individual to belong to the city. That's what we like the most in architecture. Here we are in Paris, in the very center, a very beautiful place, in front of the church of Val-de-Grâce, and we have a long boulevard. And our building, which is, well, you will see it, it's a little bit green. It's an hospital, a teenager hospital. And because of the illness that are treated there, which are mental illness, this place is partly completely closed. It's an enclosed area. Some of child come from the morning and leave on the night, but when they are in the building, inside, they are enclosed. So the program told us that we should plan a building, which should be compact building, so that the staff could easily take care of the adolescents, and also they shouldn't walk too much. We didn't agree with that kind of vision of a hospital for adolescents, and we thought that the connection with the urban animation should be something important for them. So we stretched the building along the parcel, and after we set back the building from the limit of the street so that we create an interstitial space between the building and between the city. Ah, merde, pardon. They told us this interstitial space, that exterior place, wouldn't be a good idea because adolescents wouldn't like to be seen by the city. And this image shows it is not true because the patient found there a freedom place, a freedom urban place where they can meet and where they can wait each other before enter to the hospital. This interstitial place marks the limit between patients and the city, but doesn't mark the separation for the patient from the urban community. The sun from the south enters completely to the hall on the ground. And here you see how we place with the transparency in the north facade to make a connection, a porosity with interior and exteriors. The trees The green films capture the movement of the trees, while they permit to patient to be to the interior place to be protected in their intimity. So we are very strong linked with the city. The corridors also are just behind the facade, so that people walking are in connection with urban dynamics. In the south, you have the bedrooms, and up you have a terrace where you can see, you can overlook the city in a very beautiful and protected exterior place for patients. Last project I will show you is an old one. It's our first building, 97, and it is in Lille, a city of the north of France, and it is set in the center of the city. And you have there one building, here another one. One is a museum, the other one is an administrative building. But nobody knew, as they are the same architecture, the same period, which one was the museum, which one was the administrative building. So, as they ask us an extension of the building, we take we take profit of that extension to make more visible the museum in the city. That was the atrium of the museum, which was completely closed when we arrived because they made an extension who closed because they need space, more space. So the first thing we did is to break the extension and to open it. This is the same facade. You see it now, it is opened on the exterior. And then we planned the new extension back on the parcel. So it managed a void. And in this void, the city can interfere. And then we take profit of the new visibility of this new facade to signify the presence of the museum in the city by expressing the idea of painting. We planned that all the ground floor of the museum should be in free access so that people could cross completely the museum from the ancient building to the new one as a walk in the city. And this exterior place is completely then given to the city. And then people is able to remain in, to enter into the context of the museum. And in the same time, he belongs to the system we planned, and he participates of the expression of the new museum in the city. I would like to conclude in another terms. I heard about the huge plans you have in India for new cities, new development, huge development cities. And I wish this development won't damage the heritage you have, very beautiful heritage. And this heritage, it's not only the historic one, it's also the modern one. And if you want your new generation to be happy with architecture, you must fight to keep it. Thank you.
Thanks. It's an honor to speak in ARC Forum, the ARCASIA Forum, and especially regarding this topic, rethinking urban development. Because to me, it's a coincidence that 1 month ago I was attending a forum in Wuhan, China, that is called Rethinking the Landscape, the Landmark Buildings. One point that I bring up in that forum is that in contemporary contexts, especially in China, what is more cost efficient to have a landmark. It's maybe a tall high-rise building, but rather a small but beautiful building, because with the help of social media nowadays, actually to catch more attention with the public and actually to have engagement with the activity of the citizens, that maybe you don't need that much of a high-rise building, but rather you need to find a new prototype of how your space can engage with the city. So to give a bit background of what Meta Project has been thinking and practicing, that Meta Project is the fundamental idea behind our practice is to understand the contemporary space as production from overlapping layers of social, cultural, economic, and everyday life. So there needs to be established that a relationship between building and the surrounding context in a way that is not a fixed kind of typology from existing buildings. Because since the last 2 decades, this is a photo in Shenzhen, since the last unprecedented urban development that is not so much predictable and controllable through the modern paradigm of how we understand the city growth. So instead that we believe there's a new reality that we need to seek this sort of new value of contemporary life and inject that into the knowledge we produce through understanding how the city works, the mechanism behind all the social activities, and then to recreate new prototype of buildings based on that knowledge. So actually, before I show a project that from my office, I show a bit of background of this is my itinerary. I've actually from Beijing and to Houston and to New York, and then to Rotterdam. I practice in the Office of Metropolitan Architecture. There's 2 projects I want to show before my own practice, which is pretty much related to the topic today. This one project, while I was in OMA Beijing as a project architect, this building called Interlace in Singapore. The basic idea is quite simple, that this is a project in the Green Belt in Singapore. The existing compound there was it's like in the diagram shown on the left, it was basically vertical residential towers. So the idea is how to change from the typology of a non-connected sort of gated community of vertical towers to a more sort of with more courtyards and connected with the buildings, so you can blend all the activities and livings together to recreate a different kind of community atmosphere. And so instead of vertical blocks or towers, we cut the buildings to 6-story blocks and then stack them together in a hexagonal kind of way to create many of those kind of porous kind of space, and you can look through, you can look to different direction, and you can get the view of the sea, the mountain, but more importantly, you get from different angle the view to a inner courtyard, which all the activities happen that draws sort of not only the attention but engage all the people to come down. That's what you get sort of as a result, that people all come down from the buildings to the courtyard to play together. And another project I did while I was in OMA Beijing was a tower in Bangkok. This is actually a very tall high-rise. It's the tallest in Bangkok, 340 meters. The question we ask is that there's already, through the history, many very iconic buildings trying to be one higher than the other. And also in terms of the shapes, you got the robot building and the pyramid, elephant building, UFO building. And then what next to be add to the list as a more iconic building? So we come back to the street scene that, you know, in a way it's like, you know, what is described in the ancient story of Tower of Babel. Actually, the human itself wants to build up their own way up to the tower. So from our observation of the city, there's this sort of possibility of street life just by adding itself vertically growing as a metaphor. So the proposed scheme was maybe we can bring this small scale sort of connect to the city that all the way down from the top of the tower all the way down to the street level to make a connection in terms of scale and activity, and in a way to bring all the street life back into the tower. And so you can see in the terrace there's all these kind of human scale activities, and maybe you can see, you know, clothes hanging on a high-rise tower. That's the you know, the result of the design. This is actually last year's photo. It's already finished. And you see how the building actually start to dematerialize and response to the surrounding urban context, not as so much of a pure modern sort of sleek towers. Back to my own research and practice. Meta Project it's not just a design office. So we do 50% of the time we do architecture project, but the other half of the time we do urban researches related to, especially to the contemporary scene in Southeast Asia city, more focused in Beijing. So one of the questions what we ask is, there's this paradigm that we believe in the last century that architecture as a discipline has trying to overcome with you know, to provide more housing and to provide more space and with different typology to meet the needs for a comfortable and social life in the city. But there's a ever-shifting reality that I think the 20th century has seen, that you put more planned scheme into the city and more sort of this kind of terrain vague or things that are not controlled actually start to emerge. This is a photo of the agriculture, private agriculture in the States, in Utah. It's very efficient in a way. To me, it's like a metaphor of the paradigm of modern planning, that through a very efficient technical way, with this central pivot sort of technique, you can just run this pipe along this circle. You can cultivate the land, you can watering the crop and all that. But when it comes to the time for harvest, that sign of life comes back. It's always this ever-shifting reality of the behavior and the sign of a human will always not be confined with this the sort of solid state of the society. And that's a photo of one of my research I took in, I believe it's around 2007 in Beijing, that there's all these dilapidated office towers, office compound that are actually being kind of reused as commercial, but for small business. They grow up into the building in a way like a virus kind of infect the building. So I was saw more about this project. So this project, actually, I started this urban research in 2007. It's called Wild Beijing, and also means wild being. That means a kind of experiment on all this, the wild substance that grow by itself in the city, and how it can bring a different kind of prototype for vertical city, vertical development. So that's Beijing. The donut, it's from the third, you know, Beijing is a ring city, but the donut's from the third ring to the fifth ring, which is a really dense development zone since the last two decades. And then the blue area, it's 4 out of many that I picked up, is this kind of conglomeration of special kind of industry. For example, I took the one on the bottom as an example. It's a garment industry cluster that are people move into the city from Zhejiang province, and they do all sorts of industry and exchange trading and production and trading and wholesale and retail related to clothes. But as we mentioned, the basic framework of the city was all these slab and towers of residential, kind of similar to the France city, to the Paris situation in the 50s. Actually, this is a map showing from the third ring to the fifth ring, and you see basically covering all the urban ground. The blue strip is all residential slabs, and the purple dots are towers. But within this, there's all these colorful things that are all these improvised trading are actually growing by themselves, and they're not only remaining to be, you know, improvised on the ground, but they slowly grow up and solidify themselves into like malls and bigger buildings. So we in many years we keep a kind of documentation of how these street trading and commerce actually grow. What are the mechanism behind them? For example, this open market of clothes actually eventually move into this gigantic mall, and they call it the biggest clothes mall in Asia. I don't know if that's true, but actually the scale is growing very, very fast. So, you know, but actually the building was not meant to build for a closed shopping mall. So this idea is maybe there's this sort of like some sort of wild emergence. They grow up and they eventually attach and embed into an existing framework. And so these are the timelines of how each individual trading, they grow through years. And this is a simulation we ran. That was back in 2002, and that's when we were doing, around when we were doing the research around 2006 and 2007. That's how it's already becomes. And then through that, we were kind of studying the mechanism and program behind all that, the urban growth logic, and then to promote, if we follow this mechanism, what the urban development might become. And this is even more crazy. So basically, it's like 100 times more crazy than the current status, what it would be. So we might enter a different kind of a paradigm of hacking into the existing framework, a different system of vertical development that utilizes the existing structure, but inject with a different program, with more activity of trading, and people connect and communicate with each other through trading activities. And that's the reverse logic of a, let's say, a layered, floored vertical towers or slabs. Almost you can imagine it's like sort of the ant hills with all the program in the middle. So through a tower and slab with this kind of building embedded in between, that maybe eventually we can arrive at a different paradigm of vertical density. Actually, based on that research, another line of research we did, I'm just going to quickly go through it. It's called the meta-evolution model that actually studied a whole section of the city of Beijing from the hutongs in the middle to the upper right, to the middle and to the high-rise zone on outside of 4th Ring Road. This study is more about what different kind of program we can bring to the existing residential structure. So all the transparent block are existing structure, and all the solid blocks are a different kind of new program we can potentially introduce into the existing system. This is one of the sub-research we focused on collective living. The collective living actually based on a situation very typical in China in the socialism time that you know, the city are divided into we call it 大院儿, a big yard. Actually, it's one state enterprise unit that they have all these slab buildings as dormitory for the singles. But through times they changed, and these scenes are very typical that people adding kitchens and washing machines. So basically their life unfold in the wide corridor in the middle, and there's all these kind of activities are add into it, different kind of programming. And we studied a few of this building. This is one of the building actually belonged to the Minister of, it's an apartment building belonged to the Ministry of Construction. It's very interesting because on the left was the existing situation of the original situation, but on the right you can see actually it changed vertically the program, the solid program which people stay longer was on top, and then the middle part become a kind of like a yearly renting out to people immigrant to the city, and the bottom become a short rent like Airbnb style short rent, and then the orange was even become office that are sublet to the surrounding people. And then within the building there's this sort of vertical connection of people, like the kids know where to gather, where to play. So in a way it brings a total different prototype with the existing kind of slab buildings. I'm just gonna accelerate. This is another building we look at. It's adding to a Republican period office building. All this exterior balcony, how they can work in like a different program are adding into it, connecting the sort of social connection together. So the project I'm going to show here is a project we do to one of the biggest developer in China, Vanke, and this is in a very cold zone. So what we propose is, based on all our studies, how can we move from the kind of the prototype of a standard room to a prototype where we move the bathroom and sink outside, and then with the same area we create a neighborhood sharing area. We call it new neighborhood model. And based on that model, we start to tweak the very basic slab buildings. So what we in China we call it 筒子楼, means the tube apartment. So we add all this sharing neighborhood zone and also with the central atrium, and then we cut the building from 1 to 4, and to add all the bridges and steps in the middle of the atrium, and to form this different shades of publicness from the blue, which is your private room, to a shallower purple that is semi-private into a more private zone. And even outside of the building with many courtyard and basketball court that the building can share with the surrounding villages. So you can see in the off working hours, the people from this building, these young people, playing together with the villagers around. So there's a bit more photos. On the exterior, you see the balconies are actually connecting a few rooms together. So the interior become a continuation of this kind of inner street model. And then the atrium become a central place for all sorts of improvised activity to happen. At the same time, you have people playing pools, and you have people meeting, and there's also people like reading books. And on the steps, there can be meetings and gatherings, all sorts of events, and next to it, you got this kind of people moving on and off across the building. And these are this kind of this kids is actually from this education camp playing around the building. So in the end, what I want to conclude is for us that we want to what we want to do is to start from a urban research to understand sort of the mechanism behind the contemporary city, and then to do project that can realize and push forward this kind of, to inject this new model into the building, and eventually to bring new prototype of building. Now we're in collaborating with different developer, many different developer in China to bring up this new prototype of residential buildings with Wangke, with CIFD, and with MoMA, with many developers. So hopefully these kind of, from research to prototype can help bring a new sort of way of how the new development can inject different program into the existing structure. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm glad you're still around. I know between the speakers session now, it's lunch afterwards, so I'm going to keep it short and sharp. But in the meantime, please do some logistics. Questions that you want to ask, keep to a maximum of 2 per slot, and keep your questions short. Introduce yourself so that we know who you are, and also direct the questions to the respective speaker. Just as you have noted, our first speaker has an engagement, so he has to leave. All right, so we now have only 2 speakers to respond to your question. And I like what was covered today. Very interesting contrast of experiences and exposure. The first speaker talked about Metropolis, and indeed a very tall building with the kind of development that he shared. I think Metro is a different approach. You have shared some of the experiences that you had in Paris and also in Europe. I guess the need for us is to how do we balance keeping heritage as we do development. It could be massive, but I think in Europe perhaps the development is not as massive as in Asia as well as America. I think Wang Shao's approach is also very interesting. I like the fact that he has alluded to organic growth. You know, the way you share about in the Beijing, you have highlighted skeletal frames for buildings, and you allow the people, human being users, to grow. But again, there are certain concerns I have. I just want to maybe perhaps start the discussion with a question that cuts for both. In a development that we allow for growth, while we explain that it's important to be contextual, how important do you think planning of a city is? For example, the ability to network, mobility, both lateral and vertical. How important is that kind of network is important in terms of planning for a city? Because the projects that you have highlighted are specifics, but you have actually alluded to a lot of connectivity issues. Maybe you want to start with Myrtle, or you want Wang Shou to start? You need some time to understand the question?
Yes, I need.
Yeah, okay. So Wang Shou, maybe you start with Beijing. How important is the network of connectivity in terms of providing transportation, delivery of materials, and also as you build, what kind of spaces do you allow your residents to inhabit? If you do not control them, then you run the risk of the development being a ghetto. So what kind of balance do you need in your Beijing prototype?
You see, I think when I was studying in the university in Tsinghua and in the States, and all what we've been taught is what is the more efficient way to plan a city. But actually, after I start my own practice, the more things that I focus is to look at the area, the zones of city that are not so much planned and not so much this kind of, because I always think the city is not running perfectly. I think the whole world, cities, has seen these tendencies. And then, so this, for example, in Beijing, there's the hutongs in the middle that are existing structure, but they are actually being overthrown by different layers of activity, tourism and then development and all sorts of stuff. And then all this conglomeration of different kind of trading zones, they all have their own way of growing. So I think when we talk about planning, we have to first acknowledge that there's ways that city grows. Actually, city grows from the model of, in the beginning, village grows, and then town grows, and there's this idea of people communicate with people, and the idea of social cohesiveness that gradually build up between people. But if you don't look at that in a realistic way, but you just think this is an abstract thing, that you will break this connection, you will break this kind of cohesiveness, and that you think you bring up a model that is more efficient, but in the longer run, the efficiency start to degenerate, start to slow down. So I think for me what's more important is how our model can absorb all this kind of exception, all these things that are growing out of the system, and absorb that and learn from that, absorb all this kind of knowledge that acknowledging the mechanism of how these things run and learn from it, and then inject it into the model to make the model become a more flexible one. And then when you come back, planning, like you said, the city with the networking, all that, with the consideration of all that layers of social, cultural, economical, everyday life, then I think you can arrive at a different kind of a level of planning.
Yeah, thank you. I like the idea that you've said, layering, of various particular issues and point of views. Now, in the research that you have done, I like the fact that you've done a lot of research in the Beijing city. How then would you then take the research and influence the authorities? Because at the end of the day, you're not just doing a piece of land. It has a context, and what the research that you have done has shown a lot of typologies and a lot of advocation for certain kind of design. How in your project have you influenced the government within your province or within the state?
There's two ways we're looking at. I think one way apparently is we're doing this project for big developers like Vanke, and through the process of them understanding this is more valuable for their means, and it's actually bring more attention and bring more, like Vanke, actually the boss of Vanke, Wang Shi, said this is one of the most sort of humanitarian concerned building of Vanke that they have done. It's actually more than he think of the residential towers and slab. That's one way, so they can bring that idea to the social media and to the government and say, hey, there's a new model we can try, maybe this is better. But another way is we show all the research material, we package them into knowledge package. We show them in like Beijing Design Week, and then which we invite a lot of people experts from different background, social anthropology, historian, and all that, even government people and developer, to discuss together on a round table. And we also show that in Shenzhen, Hong Kong Biennale, and Shanghai Architecture Biennale, and also Venice Biennale, and Milan Design Week, and all this kind of exhibition to have like booklets and videos so that this idea get communicated and people will come to us and to talk about this. I think gradually this will also cast an influence.
Okay, very good. I think we need to go beyond our design skills. All right, I like that. Coming back to Merto, you would like to respond to, like in Paris, how would you handle vertical development? You have shown some, but for example, the projects in Vanderlyn that you have showcased, how do they do injection into the city where you have the city growing at a very fast pace?
Excuse me, I didn't understand.
Okay, maybe I'll keep it simple.
No, I would like to say I'm I agree with most of things you said and your presentation. The only thing maybe could be the idea of model, which is always a little bit dangerous. It seems me a little bit dangerous because situations are very different, and maybe you have to do that to communicate the idea. Maybe it's, but the idea of model. Can you precise what you and what is your idea of a model?
Yeah. Well, I understand what you mean. I think when we say the previous model it has problem, the model we bring also could potentially have problem. But I think that's what architects do. You know, what I think rules and prototypes and paradigms are eventually inevitable for the discipline of architecture. And we can, but the thing is whether we can bring a more flexible prototype that we embrace the knowledge from other disciplines. We need to talk with other people, because sometimes when I just started, I do like a social research, but when the social anthropologists saw our research, they laugh. Like, you don't understand social connection, and then this just taking photos and making drawings, you think that's social, you know, anthropologists. But then we start to talk with them more, and they bring their tools and their ways of research into. Actually, we have now a platform of 6 disciplines: architecture, social anthropologist, and behavior psychologist, and social network, internet people, and also financing people. I think it's 6, if not, 6 disciplines. We constantly, like every month, we sit together to talk about how this kind of research can unfold. So you really need to, I think, if the model can address more discipline, then it can be more rich and more flexible.
You are speaking more about a process than architecture itself.
Yeah.
You give the keys to be able to build on your. How do you say?
I think what you're asking is that embracing the physical model of architecture, and what he's saying is that
He's
you need to
speaking about the process,
you
which
need
is
to
very
engage, and you need to have dialogue, because now it goes beyond the end users.
We need both of things. We need a
Yes,
process,
that's right,
and we need
that's
after
right.
the
That's right,
realization
yes,
of architecture, which is a real discipline also,
Yes,
and very
yes,
difficult
yes.
one. So both things exist, and the process permits the flexibility, but it's a beginning of the structure of, and it's not the final. It's a way to.
Okay. And exactly, is a need for dialogue session.
In that way, too, was something very important also that escape often to the architect. It's the program, and program can be very decisive when you make a city, and we should much more be able to criticize a program and not permit coming, and that makes. The ghettos we talk about, because programs are abstract things that programists, which are specialized in programs, repeat from one place to the other one, and the architecture should be able to englobe, how do we say, globalize.
Embrace the concerns. In fact, on that, I like the fact that you use program, because in your teenagers' hospital, you mentioned that the program is very much inward-looking.
In all our work, we take the liberté, how would we say, freedom. To contest the program.
Right. That's a very good approach.
In contesting the program begins the architecture.
Yeah. So the approach that you took was fantastic, because you didn't follow totally the client's requirement by injecting your value, adding what you feel.
The client's requirement is rentability, is a lot of things that are not directly linked with the happiness of people, with the climate, with, for example, when you speak about kind of buildings. You maybe have some towers very well done in a place, but not in other one, because in other one, for example, the structure you show permits wind to go in.
Yes,
and
yes,
you understand there is a lot of
Yes.
things that architect could give their option, but they are not the. It's very often we can't speak about that.